The massive doors of the convergence station slid open with a sound that echoed through the grand hall. Captain Hyunwoo stepped forward, his boots clicking against the polished floor that seemed to stretch forever. Behind him walked Ambassador Dae-jung and Dr. Yoon-ji, both carrying data tablets filled with Earth's achievements. Their hearts beat fast with excitement and hope. Today was the day humanity would finally take its place among the stars. The hall was enormous, bigger than any building on Earth. Thousands of aliens filled the space, representing civilizations from across the galaxy. Some had scales that shimmered like rainbows. Others floated in bubbles of strange liquid. A few were so large they made humans look like insects. The air smelled different here, a mix of chemicals and scents that had no name in any Earth language. Hyunwoo looked around at the gathering. He had spent months preparing for this moment. Earth had finally cracked faster than light travel just 5 years ago. The journey to reach the station had taken everything humanity could spare. 3 ships, the best Earth could build, carrying the hopes of 8 billion people back home. A tall reptilian creature moved toward them. Its scales were deep purple and its eyes were cold yellow slits. This was Velthara, representative of the Sarith Empire. The creature looked down at the humans and made a sound that the translation device interpreted as laughter. "So these are the newcomers," Velthara said, its voice dripping with contempt. "The ones who only just learned to leave their tiny planet." "How amusing." Dae-jung stepped forward and bowed politely. "Greetings. We come from Earth with open hearts and minds. We wish to learn from the great civilizations gathered here and contribute what we can to the galactic community." More laughter rippled through the hall. An insectoid creature, ancient and covered in scarred chitin, crawled forward on 6 legs. This was Cormix of the Hive Collective. When it spoke, its voice sounded like grinding metal. Contribute? What could a species barely 200,000 years old possibly contribute? We have civilizations here that were building stargates when your ancestors were still living in caves. You are children playing with toys you barely understand. Yoon-ji felt her face grow hot with anger, but she kept quiet. She clutched her tablet tighter. Inside were designs for human FTL drives, medical advances, and countless innovations humanity was proud of. She had been so excited to share them. Hyunwoo placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. He had expected this. During the months of travel, he had studied every piece of information Earth had about the Galactic Assembly. The reports were clear. The established civilizations did not welcome newcomers easily. They saw themselves as superior, their ways as the only correct ways. The formal presentation began. Dae-jung spoke about Earth's history, its struggles and its triumphs. He showed images of human cities, of art and music, of the first human steps on the moon and later Mars. He spoke with passion about humanity's desire for peace and cooperation. The aliens watched with bored expressions. Some didn't even look at the screens. Others whispered among themselves, pointing at the humans and making sounds the translators couldn't quite capture. When it came time to present human technology, Yoon-ji stepped forward. Her voice shook slightly at first, but grew stronger as she explained the human FTL drive. It was different from the alien designs, where alien drives opened stable wormholes through careful manipulation of space-time. Human drives essentially forced their way through reality itself. It was crude, yes, but it worked. Velthara interrupted her mid-sentence. "You still use chemical propulsion for planetary launches? How primitive. We abandoned such inefficient methods 3,000 years ago. Your FTL drive is like a hammer smashing through a wall instead of opening a door. Brute force with no elegance." "It gets us here," Hyunwoo said quietly. "Barely," Cormix added. "We've seen your ships, held together with what you call steel alloys and powered by fusion reactors. We used such things as children's toys millennia ago. You have nothing to offer us." The Assembly Council called for a vote on humanity's membership tier. The decision was quick and unanimous. Humans would be granted the lowest tier of membership. They would have access to only the most basic trade routes. No advanced technology would be shared with them. No seats in the actual decision-making councils. They could send representatives to observe and learn, but they would have no voice in galactic affairs. The restrictions continued. Humans would be assigned to resource extraction duties in the Outer Rim territories. They would maintain and clean the stations that the higher-tier species didn't want to deal with. They would transport cargo that was too cheap for advanced civilizations to bother with. "Think of it as an apprenticeship," Velthara said with another one of those cold laughs. "Prove yourselves useful for a few centuries and perhaps we'll reconsider your position." Dae-jung's shoulders slumped. All his hopes, all his speeches about cooperation and mutual respect meant nothing here. Humans were being treated like servants, like barely intelligent creatures lucky enough to stumble into space. That evening, back in their small assigned quarters on the station, the three humans sat in silence. The room was tiny, barely large enough for 3 bunks and a small table. Through the window, they could see the enormous ships of other civilizations docked at the station. Each one was elegant, sleek, and massive. The human ships looked like crude boxes by comparison. 200 years of space exploration, Yoonji said bitterly. All our achievements, everything we've built, and they treat us like we're nothing. They're afraid, Hyunwoo said quietly. Both Dae-jung and Yoonji looked at him in surprise. Afraid? Dae-jung asked. They just humiliated us in front of the entire galaxy. How are they afraid? Hyunwoo stood and looked out the window. They're old. All of them. They've been doing things the same way for thousands of years. They have rules for everything. Did you notice how formal everything was? How they all followed the exact same protocols. They're comfortable, stable, and we're different. We don't follow their rules because we don't know them yet. That makes us unpredictable. Being unpredictable didn't help us today, Yoonji muttered. No, Hyunwoo agreed. But we've only just arrived. They think they know everything about us after one meeting. Let them think we're primitive. Let them believe we're just lucky children who stumbled into space. We'll watch. We'll learn, and we'll adapt. Dae-jung looked at the captain with new interest. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we play the role they've given us. We'll clean their stations and haul their cargo. We'll be the quiet, obedient newcomers they expect. But while we do that, we learn everything we can about how this galaxy really works. We study their technology, their politics, their weaknesses. That could take years, Yoonji said. Then we take years, Hyunwoo replied. Humans are good at one thing these aliens seem to have forgotten. We adapt, we survived ice ages and plagues. We rebuilt after wars that nearly destroyed us. We went from wooden ships to starships in just a few centuries. They mock us for being young, but youth means we can still change. They can't. The three sat in silence, letting the words sink in. Outside, the vast galaxy turned, full of ancient civilizations that had forgotten what it meant to struggle and grow. They had laughed at humanity today. They had dismissed Earth as insignificant. But Hyunwoo watched the stars and remembered something his grandfather had told him long ago. The nail that sticks up gets hammered down, but the nail that's already down can't fall any further. Humanity had been knocked down today. The galaxy had made its judgment. What they didn't know was that humans were very good at getting back up, and when they did, they came back stronger, smarter, and more dangerous than before. The mockery would be remembered, but it wouldn't be the end of the story. It was only the beginning. 5 years had passed since that humiliating day at the Convergence. 5 long years of hauling cargo, cleaning stations, and being treated like servants by every alien species in the galaxy. But humanity had not been idle. While they worked, they watched. While they served, they learned. On a research station orbiting Mars, engineer Ji-won stared at the holographic display floating above her workbench. She was 26 years old, part of the generation that grew up hearing stories about Earth's humiliation at the Galactic Assembly. Those stories had lit a fire in her and thousands like her. They didn't want speeches or diplomacy. They wanted to prove that humans were more than what the galaxy thought. Run the simulation again, Ji-won said to her team. The hologram flickered and showed a ship design unlike anything Earth had built before. It combined human engineering with carefully studied alien technology, not copied but understood and reimagined. The ship moved through the simulation at speeds that made the team gasp. It works, breathed one of the technicians. It actually works. Ji-won allowed herself a small smile. The hybrid drive system they had developed was revolutionary. Human FTL drives forced through reality with raw power. Alien drives opened elegant doorways through space-time. This new system did both. It had the speed and efficiency of alien technology, with the aggressive, adaptable nature of human engineering. Send the data to Commander Sang-hee, Ji-won ordered. Tell her the fleet can be upgraded within 6 months. Across the solar system, on a military base hidden in the asteroid belt, Commander Sang-hee received the message. She stood before a window overlooking a sight that would have shocked the Galactic Assembly. Hundreds of ships floated in formation. Not cargo haulers or station cleaners, warships. Earth had been building them in secret for 3 years. Every resource humanity could spare went into this fleet. They were small compared to the massive alien battleships, but they were fast, deadly, and crewed by people who had something to prove. Admiral Taeyang entered the command center. He was a tall man with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much combat in Earth's old wars. He had come out of retirement when humanity began this project. Now he commanded the Terran Defense Force, a military branch that officially didn't exist yet. "The new drives are ready," Sang-hee reported. "Jiwan says we can begin installation next week." Taeyang nodded slowly. "Good. We'll need them sooner than planned." The Sarith just raided New Sol Colony. Sang-hee's expression hardened. New Sol was a small human settlement on the edge of explored space. It had a population of 50,000, mostly families trying to build new lives away from overcrowded Earth. The Sarith had no reason to raid it except to remind humans of their place. "How many casualties?" she asked quietly. "Unknown. Communications were cut off 2 hours ago, but Velthara sent us a message." Taeyang brought up a hologram showing the smug reptilian alien. "They're claiming salvage rights under galactic law. Apparently our colony was built on what they consider Sarith territory." "That's impossible. We filed all the proper claims through the Assembly. The Assembly approved their claim anyway. We're expected to evacuate and abandon everything we built." Taeyang's voice was calm, but his hands were clenched into fists. "They're testing us, seeing if we'll fight back or keep playing the obedient servants." Sang-hee looked out at the fleet. "What are your orders, Admiral?" "Launch the third fleet, full combat deployment, and send a message to Velthara. Tell them we're coming to reclaim our property." The battle at New Sol would later be remembered as the moment everything changed. When the Sarith ships arrived at the colony, they expected an easy victory. Human ships had always run away before. They were weak, poorly armed, and crewed by a species that didn't understand real warfare. The Sarith fleet consisted of 20 cruisers, each one 3 times the size of the largest human ship. They moved in traditional formation, broadcasting demands for surrender in 15 different languages. They didn't expect an answer. Humans always surrendered, but this time 60 human ships dropped out of FTL, right in the middle of their formation. The Sarith commander barely had time to react before human weapons opened fire. The first Sarith cruiser exploded, its shields overwhelmed by weapons that ignored every traditional rule of galactic warfare. Galactic combat had rules. Ships maintained certain distances. Weapons were designed to disable, not destroy. There were safe zones where crew quarters were located that were never targeted. These rules had been followed for thousands of years by every civilized species. Humans didn't know about these rules. Or rather, they knew and didn't care. Human ships moved in patterns that seemed random, but were actually calculated chaos. They got so close to Sarith vessels that point defense systems couldn't track them. They targeted engines first, then weapons, then life support. They used kinetic weapons that were considered primitive. But at these speeds, a chunk of metal moving at a significant fraction of light speed was devastating. Commander Sang-hee watched from her flagship as the battle unfolded. She had studied every piece of information Earth had on galactic warfare. She understood their tactics, their formations, their honor-bound rules, and she had designed human combat doctrine to exploit every single weakness those traditions created. "They're trying to hail us," her communication officer reported. "Ignore it. Maintain firing solutions." The Sarith commander was panicking. His ships were being torn apart by an enemy that fought like nothing he had encountered in 3 centuries of service. They didn't maintain formation. They didn't respect safe zones. They didn't follow any civilized rules of engagement. Finally, the Sarith fleet broke and retreated. Of their 20 cruisers, 8 were destroyed completely. 6 were crippled and drifting. The rest fled at maximum FTL speed. Human casualties were 12 ships damaged, none destroyed, and 43 crew members killed. Sang-hee surveyed the battlefield with mixed feelings. They had won, but the cost in lives was real. These weren't simulations. Those were real people who died today. Still, they had sent a message that would echo across the galaxy. When Velthara received the report, the reptilian alien couldn't believe it. The primitive humans had destroyed a Sarith fleet? Impossible. There had to be some mistake. The Sarith were a military power that had dominated their region of space for 5,000 years. Humans were barely out of their caves by galactic standards, but the sensor logs didn't lie. Neither did the distress calls from the surviving Sarith ships. Velthara immediately contacted the Galactic Assembly and demanded an explanation. How were humans allowed to deploy military vessels? Why weren't they following established rules of warfare? This was a violation of every treaty and tradition. The Assembly called an emergency session. Representatives from 100 species gathered to discuss the human problem. Many agreed with Velthara. Humans were dangerous, unpredictable, and clearly didn't respect the civilized order that kept the galaxy stable. But there were others who watched the battle recordings with different eyes. They saw the efficiency of human tactics, the speed of their new ships, the ruthless effectiveness of their weapons, and they remembered something from their own histories, from ages long past when their own species were young and hungry. This was how wars were won before everyone grew comfortable and complacent. This was what happened when a species had everything to prove and nothing to lose. Dr. Yunji presented Earth's response to the Assembly. She stood before the same grand hall where humanity had been humiliated 5 years ago. But this time her voice didn't shake. This time she had the attention of every being in the room. "You assigned us to the lowest tier of membership," she said clearly. "You gave us no voice in your councils. You granted us no protections under your laws. The Sarith attacked our colony unprovoked. Under the terms of our membership, we had no legal recourse through the Assembly, so we exercised our right to self-defense. You violated every rule of civilized warfare," Cormix protested. Yunji looked directly at the ancient insectoid. "We never agreed to your rules. You never thought to ask if we would follow them. You assumed we would because everyone else does. That was your mistake, not ours." The chamber erupted in arguments and debates, but underlying all of it was a new emotion that hadn't been present 5 years. Ego. Fear. The galaxy had spent so long being comfortable and safe that they had forgotten what it felt like to face an enemy that didn't play by their rules. Back on Earth, in a small apartment in Seoul, a young girl named Yuna watched the news broadcasts with wide eyes. She was 10 years old and dreamed of becoming a pilot. Today she watched as humanity went from being laughed at to being feared. The adults talked nervously about war and consequences, but Yuna smiled. The universe had laughed at humanity. Now it was learning that humans could bite back, and deep in her young heart, she knew this was only the beginning of something much bigger. The emergency alert reached every corner of the galaxy simultaneously. In the grand hall of the Convergence, Archon Kelva stood before the full assembly with an expression that mixed terror and grim determination. The holographic display behind him showed something that made even the oldest civilizations feel cold dread. The Vexkari had awakened 3,000 years ago. The mechanical swarm nearly destroyed all organic life in the galaxy. It took the combined might of 200 civilizations and billions of lives to finally seal them away in a pocket dimension at the galactic rim. Every species remembered the war through their histories. It was the last time the galaxy truly united against a common threat. Now the seals had broken. Sensor data showed the swarm spreading like a disease, consuming star systems one after another. Their ships were different from anything the current galaxy used. No crews, no life support, just pure killing machines that adapted and learned from every battle. They didn't negotiate. They didn't take prisoners. They simply consumed everything in their path. "We are activating Protocol Omega," Kelvas announced. "Every species must contribute ships and resources to the defensive fleet. We will meet them at the threshold sector and hold the line there. If we fail, the swarm will reach the core systems within a year." The assembly erupted in panicked discussions. Some species wanted to flee to the far edges of the galaxy. Others demanded their ancient weapons and defenses be activated. A few suggested negotiation, though everyone knew the Vexkari didn't negotiate. In the back of the hall, Captain Hyunwoo listened carefully. He was no longer a humiliated diplomat. 5 years of survival and success had changed him. He stood taller now, and when he spoke, others listened, even if they didn't want to. Velthara approached him cautiously. The reptilian alien looked older somehow, less arrogant. "How many ships can Earth contribute?" The question was asked with none of the mockery from years before. 300 warships, Hyunwoo replied. "We can be at the threshold sector in 2 weeks." Velthara's eyes widened. 300? But your entire species barely had 50 ships 5 years ago. "We've been busy." The alien studied him for a long moment. "The assembly expects humans to take support positions. Cargo transport, medical ships, repair crews. The front line will be handled by experienced militaries." Hyunwoo's expression didn't change. "Is that an order or a suggestion?" "It's wisdom." Your species has fought one battle. We've fought thousands over millennia. This enemy requires discipline and coordination on a scale you cannot imagine. Then I suppose you'll see what humans can imagine. Hyunwoo said quietly. We'll deploy where we're needed most. And right now, that's at the front. 2 weeks later, the combined galactic fleet assembled at the Threshold sector. It was the most impressive military gathering in modern history. 5,000 ships from dozens of species formed a defensive line, 50 light-years across. The Sarith contributed their massive cruisers. The Hive Collective sent swarms of smaller fighters. Other species brought weapons platforms, shield generators, and support vessels. And then humanity arrived. The 300 human ships dropped out of FTL in perfect formation. They were smaller than most alien vessels, but they moved with a precision that impressed even the most skeptical observers. Admiral Tae-yang commanded from the flagship Unity, a name chosen specifically to remind everyone what this fight was about. Tactical Officer Bora sat at her station, analyzing the defensive formation the aliens had created. She was 28 years old with a mind like a computer. She could see patterns others missed and calculate probabilities that seemed impossible. Right now she was frowning. The formation is too rigid, she told Tae-yang. They're setting up like this is a traditional battle. Defined lines, specific firing zones, clear hierarchies of command. The Vexkari won't fight like that. Can we convince them to adjust? Tae-yang asked. Bora pulled up data from the ancient war. The historical records show the Vexkari adapt within minutes. They learn from every attack and adjust their defenses in real time. Traditional tactics lasted an average of 4.3 engagements before becoming completely ineffective. This formation will hold for maybe one battle. Then it will become a trap. What do you recommend? Chaos, controlled chaos. Keep everything fluid and unpredictable. No fixed formations. No repeated patterns. Make it impossible for them to adapt because we're constantly changing. Tae-yang smiled grimly. That's not how the galaxy fights wars. No, sir. But it's how humans do. The Vexkari arrived 3 days later. Sensors detected them first. A massive wall of darkness moving through space faster than should be possible. The swarm didn't use FTL like organic species. They somehow folded space around themselves, arriving everywhere at once. The first wave hit the defensive line like a tsunami of metal and death. 10,000 Vexkari drones, each one the size of a small ship, moving in perfect synchronization. They weren't beautiful or elegant. They were purely functional, designed only to kill and consume. Archon Kelvis gave the order to fire. The combined fleet unleashed everything it had. Energy weapons, missiles, kinetic rounds, even exotic weapons based on physics most humans didn't understand. The space between the fleets lit up like a newborn star. The Vexkari formation rippled but didn't break. Their shields adapted in real time, adjusting to every weapon frequency, every attack pattern. What destroyed drones in the first minute became ineffective in the second. The swarm learned faster than the organic fleet could adjust. 30 minutes into the battle, the defensive line began to crumble. Alien ships that had stood for thousands of years were torn apart by an enemy that knew exactly how to kill them. The Vexkari had fought these species before 3,000 years ago. They remembered every tactic, every weakness, every ship design. All forces fall back to secondary positions, Kelvis ordered. The retreat was organized but desperate. Ships that couldn't disengage were simply abandoned. The swarm didn't pursue. They didn't need to. They had proven their point. In one engagement, they had broken the galaxy's finest military force. On the Unity, Tae-yang watched the retreat with a calculating expression. Bora, did you get what you needed? Yes, sir. I've analyzed their adaptation patterns. They're predictable in their unpredictability, if that makes sense. They counter whatever we do, but they follow logical progressions. They're machines. They can't truly innovate. Can we exploit that? Absolutely. But we'll need complete tactical freedom. No coordination with the main fleet. They'll just get in our way. Tae-yang opened a channel to Kelvis. This is Admiral Tae-yang of the Terran Defense Force, requesting permission for independent action. Kelvis appeared on the screen, looking exhausted and defeated. Independent action? Admiral, we just lost 200 ships in 30 minutes. We need to regroup, rethink our strategy. With respect, Archon, your strategy won't work. The Vexkari have already learned how you fight. They beat you 3,000 years ago, and they'll beat you again if you keep doing the same things. Let us try something different. Different? Your species has been in space for barely a decade. What could you possibly do that we cannot? Something they don't expect, Taeyang said simply. Something they've never seen before. Let us go first in the next engagement. If we fail, you lose 300 ships. If we succeed, you might see something worth copying. There was a long silence. Finally, Kelvas nodded. Very well. The human fleet will take point position. May whatever gods you believe in watch over you. The second battle began 6 hours later. The Vexkari had been steadily advancing, confident in their superiority. When sensors detected ships moving to engage them, they prepared their proven countermeasures. Energy weapon frequencies were adjusted. Shield configurations were optimized. Attack patterns from the previous battle were loaded into tactical cores. Then the human fleet hit them like a hammer made of pure chaos. Bora had spent those 6 hours creating what she called organized insanity. No ship followed the same attack vector. No weapon fired in predictable sequences. Human vessels broke every rule of formation combat, moving in patterns that seemed suicidal, but were actually carefully calculated. One ship would charge directly at the Vexkari line, weapons blazing, only to veer off at the last second while 3 others attacked from different angles. Drones were released in clouds that broke apart and reformed in random configurations. Kinetic weapons were mixed with energy beams at unpredictable intervals. Nothing repeated. Nothing gave the swarm time to adapt. Captain Hyunwoo commanded one of the assault wings. His ship, the Sole Defender, wove through enemy fire with his crew working in perfect harmony. They had trained for this, practiced until their movements were instinct. Target their computational nodes, Hyunwoo ordered. Bora identified them as the central points of each formation. If we take those out, the rest lose coordination. It was working. The Vexkari were designed to counter organized military tactics. They expected patterns and formations, but humans were fighting like nothing in their databases. Ships that should have died somehow survived through pure unpredictability. Attacks came from angles that made no tactical sense but somehow worked. The swarm tried to adapt, but every time they adjusted to one attack pattern, humans had already moved on to something completely different. It was like trying to catch smoke. The harder they tried, the more elusive their enemies became. After 2 hours of brutal combat, the Vexkari withdrew. It wasn't a rout, but it was definitely a retreat. For the first time in 3,000 years, the swarm had encountered an enemy it couldn't simply learn to defeat. The human ships had taken heavy damage, but they had achieved the impossible. They had made the Vexkari hesitate. On the convergence, Velthara watched the battle recordings in silence. The primitive humans, the species they had mocked just years ago, had done what the Assembly's finest could not. They had hurt the swarm, really hurt it. The reptilian alien felt something that it hadn't experienced in centuries. Respect mixed with fear, because if humans could do this to the Vexkari, what could they do to everyone else? The galaxy would never laugh at humanity again. The war had dragged on for 18 brutal months. What began as a defensive action at the Threshold sector had evolved into a grinding conflict that consumed resources and lives at a terrifying rate. The Vexkari were relentless, and despite early human successes, the swarm seemed endless. For every 100 drones destroyed, 1,000 more appeared. Dr. Yoon-ji stood in a laboratory deep inside Earth's moon, surrounded by holographic displays and experimental equipment. She hadn't slept properly in days. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, but they burned with fierce determination. Around her, scientists from a dozen different species worked alongside human researchers. That alone would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. Now it was necessity. Run the calculation again, Yoon-ji said to a floating crystalline alien named Sorvex. The alien species communicated through light patterns, which the translation matrix converted to speech. The mathematics are sound, Dr. Yoon-ji. The theoretical framework holds, but the power requirements are beyond anything we've ever attempted, and the risk of catastrophic dimensional collapse is 93%. Only 93? Yoon-ji managed a tired smile. Yesterday it was 97. We're making progress. The project was called Resonance. It was humanity's desperate gambit, born from Yoon-ji's unique understanding of how human FTL drives worked differently from alien technology. While alien drives carefully opened doorways through space-time, human drives essentially punched through reality with brute force. It was crude, yes, but Yoon-ji had realized that crudeness could be weaponized. The Vexkari existed partially outside normal space. Their central intelligence operated from a pocket dimension, sending instructions to the drones that filled real space. Kill the intelligence and the entire swarm would collapse. The problem was reaching that pocket dimension. Every conventional weapon the galaxy possessed couldn't touch it. Alien FTL technology was too precise, too controlled. It couldn't force entry where none existed, but human FTL could, if scaled up enough. Engineer G1 entered the lab, her uniform stained with grease and coolant. She had been overseeing the construction of the resonance device for 16 months straight. The weapon was being built in a hidden facility in the Kuiper Belt, far from prying eyes. "Status report," Yunji asked. "We're 70% complete. The primary resonance chamber is operational, and we've integrated the power cores from 18 different species. Getting them all to work together was like trying to make a symphony from instruments that were never meant to play in harmony." Jiwan paused. "But it's working. We're actually building something that's never existed before." "What about the delivery system?" Jiwan's expression darkened. "That's the problem. The device needs to be brought within 10,000 kilometers of the Vex-Kari central nexus. That's basically suicide range. Nothing we've built can survive getting that close. Then we build something that can. Across the solar system, on a training facility orbiting Jupiter, a young woman named Yuna sat in a flight simulator, sweat dripping down her face. She was 16 years old now, one of the youngest combat pilots in human history. The war had aged her, taken away her childhood and replaced it with purpose and skill. She had logged more combat hours than most pilots twice her age. Her instructor, Captain Hyunwoo, watched from the observation deck. He had insisted on training the best pilots personally. Yuna was the best of the best. She could fly patterns that made computers throw errors. She could make a ship dance through weapons fire that should have vaporized her. She flew on instinct and calculation mixed together in a way that defied explanation. "Again," Hyunwoo said through the comm, "this time with 15% more evasion variance." Yuna didn't complain. She reset the simulation and dove back in. On the screens, her simulated ship wove through a storm of Vex-Kari fire, each movement unpredictable but purposeful. This was what the mission would require. Perfect unpredictability, controlled chaos, human specialty. Hyunwoo knew what they were asking of these young pilots. He knew that the resonance mission might be one way, but he also knew that every day the war continued. More people died. Children lost parents. Entire colonies were evacuated or destroyed. If there was even a chance to end it, they had to take it. Meanwhile, the war itself had transformed the galaxy in unexpected ways. Human ships now fought alongside alien vessels in mixed squadrons. At first it had been awkward and tense. The aliens distrusted human tactics. Humans found alien protocols too rigid. But necessity forced cooperation, and cooperation bred understanding. Captain Hyunwoo commanded a strike force that included human destroyers, Sarith cruisers, and Hive collective fighters. They had been fighting together for 8 months and had learned each other's strengths and weaknesses. The aliens had learned that human unpredictability was actually carefully controlled chaos. Humans had learned that alien discipline and coordination could be incredibly effective when properly applied. In the command center of his flagship, Hyunwoo reviewed tactical plans with his mixed species officers. Velthara was there, the same reptilian who had mocked humanity years ago. The alien looked different now. Battle scars marked its scales and its eyes held respect where once there was only contempt. "The next engagement will be at the Corvin cluster," Velthara explained, highlighting a star system on the tactical display. "Intelligence suggests a major Vex-Kari force is gathering there. If we can disrupt their formation before they fully assemble, we can buy the researchers more time." Hyunwoo studied the plan. It was solid, combining human speed and unpredictability with alien firepower and shields. They had learned to work together, creating tactics that were more effective than either species could manage alone. "What's our timeline?" 48 hours. The Assembly is also requesting human input on the Resonance Project status. Tell them Dr. Yunji needs 3 more months. And absolute secrecy. If the Vex-Kari learn what we're planning, they'll adjust their defenses. Later that evening, Hyunwoo found Cormix in the observation lounge. The ancient insectoid stood before the window watching the stars. It had been weeks since they spoke privately. "I owe your species an apology," Cormix said without turning around. "When you first arrived at the convergence, I called you children. Statistical anomalies. Lucky primitives. You weren't wrong, Hyunwoo replied, moving to stand beside the alien. We were lucky. We did stumble into space relatively quickly compared to most species. But that wasn't weakness. It was strength. We, the ancient civilizations, we grew comfortable. We forgot what it meant to struggle and adapt. We created rules and traditions and convinced ourselves they were universal laws. Then you arrived and ignored all of it. At first we thought you were foolish. Now I understand you were simply free from the chains we had forged for ourselves. The chains of success, Hyunwoo said softly. Yes, we became so successful that we stopped innovating. Stopped taking risks. Your species never had that luxury. You were forced to adapt constantly just to survive. That made you dangerous in ways we couldn't predict. Is that what this war has taught the galaxy? That new ideas matter? Cormix made a clicking sound that might have been laughter. This war has taught us many things. But perhaps the most important is that longevity and wisdom are not the same thing. We lived for millennia, but you learned faster in decades than we did in centuries. 3 months later, the resonance device was complete. It was an ugly thing. A massive construct of metal and energy conduits that looked like it was held together with hope and determination. In a way it was. Engineers from 30 different species had contributed to its construction, each adding their unique understanding of physics and technology. The device was loaded onto a special carrier ship, escorted by the largest fleet humanity could assemble. 200 human vessels, along with 500 alien ships volunteering for what everyone knew was likely a suicide mission. The Vexkari Central Nexus had been located through months of careful observation and sacrifice. It existed in a pocket dimension anchored to real space at coordinates deep in swarm-controlled territory. Yuna sat in the cockpit of her fighter, designated Shadow 1. She was the lead pilot for the delivery squadron, 12 ships total, the fastest and most agile vessels humanity had ever built. Their job was to punch through the Vexkari defenses and get the resonance device close enough to activate. All pilots, this is Admiral Taeyang. The Admiral's voice came through clear and steady. You know the mission. You know the risks. If any of you want to back out, no one will think less of you. This is beyond what we should ask of anyone. Yuna thought about her family back on Earth, her parents, her little brother. She thought about the colonies that had been destroyed, the millions who had died, the future that would be lost if they failed. Shadow Squadron reporting ready, Admiral. We're not backing out. One by one, the other pilots confirmed. They were ready. They were terrified, but ready. Dr. Yoonji monitored the device remotely from the moon base. Ji-won was with the fleet riding in the carrier ship. If adjustments were needed during the mission, she would make them in person. It was dangerous, probably insane, but Ji-won had refused to let anyone else take the risk with her creation. The fleet began its final approach to the target coordinates. Space around them erupted with Vexkari defenders. The battle that followed would be remembered as one of the most intense in galactic history. Human and alien ships fought side by side, buying time and space for the delivery squadron. The symphony of war played its terrible song, and humanity conducted it with determination born of desperation and hope. The space around the Vexkari Central Nexus was thick with combat. Millions of drones swarmed like angry insects around the combined galactic fleet. Energy weapons painted the darkness with colors that had no names in human language. Ships exploded in silence, their crews dying in flashes of light that lasted less than a heartbeat. Admiral Taeyang stood on the bridge of the Unity, watching the tactical displays with the calm expression of a man who had already accepted his fate. The fleet was being torn apart. They had known this would happen. The plan had always been to throw everything they had at the Vexkari defenses, just to create a single opening for the delivery squadron. They were succeeding, but the cost was measured in thousands of lives every minute. Shadow Squadron, you have a window, Taeyang transmitted. Make it count. Yuna heard the words and felt time slow down around her. This was it. Everything they had trained for, everything they had sacrificed, all came down to the next 10 minutes. She pushed her fighter's engines to maximum and dove toward the swirling mass of enemy drones. Behind her, 11 other pilots followed in perfect formation. They moved like a single organism, each pilot anticipating the other's movements through months of brutal training. The Vexkari opened fire and space became a storm of death. Break pattern Omega, Yuna commanded, and the formation exploded outward. Each ship took a different vector, weaving through weapons fire with movements that seemed impossible. 2 pilots were hit immediately, their ships disintegrating in silent explosions. 10 remained. On the carrier ship, Ji-won monitored the resonance device with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The device was stable, but it needed to be within 10,000 kilometers of the Nexus to activate. They were currently 80,000 kilometers away, and losing escorts fast. The carrier was massive and slow, never designed for combat. It relied entirely on the fleet to protect it. A section of the human battle line collapsed as Vexkari drones punched through. 50 drones broke off from the main swarm and headed directly for the carrier. Death was coming, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it except there was. Captain Hyunwoo saw the threat from his position, commanding the mixed species strike force. His ship, the Sole Defender, was heavily damaged. Main weapons offline, hull breaches on 3 decks. Life support failing. They had maybe 20 minutes before the ship would need to be abandoned. He could order a retreat, save his crew, and live to fight another day. Instead, he gave different orders. All hands, this is the captain. We're making a run at those drones. Engineering, give me everything the engines have left. Weapons, prepare for ramming speed. His crew understood immediately. No one argued. No one questioned. They had all volunteered for this mission knowing it might end this way. If their deaths could buy Shadow Squadron a few more minutes, it was worth it. The Sole Defender accelerated directly into the path of the approaching drones. Hyunwoo felt the ship shudder as the last weapons fired, taking out 3 drones before the systems finally died. Then they hit the enemy formation at full speed. The impact was devastating for both sides. The Sole Defender's reinforced hull plowed through a dozen drones before the ship began to break apart. Emergency alarms screamed. Crew members were thrown from their stations. Fire and vacuum tore through multiple decks simultaneously, but they had succeeded. The drone formation was scattered, slowed, pulled off course. The carrier ship slipped past the disrupted enemy and continued toward the Nexus. In the wreckage of the Sole Defender, Hyunwoo pulled himself from the ruins of the captain's chair and saw that most of his crew had made it to escape pods. They would be captured or killed by the Vexkari, but at least they would die knowing they had mattered. Belthera watched Hyunwoo's sacrifice from the bridge of a Sarith cruiser and felt something that might have been grief. The human had saved the mission by destroying himself. It was insanity. It was heroism. It was the most human thing the reptilian alien had ever witnessed. In that moment, Belthera understood why the galaxy would never be the same after this war. Humans had reminded everyone what it meant to fight for something bigger than yourself. Shadow Squadron was down to 6 ships now. Yuna's fighter had scorch marks across its hull, and one engine was running at 60%. She could see the Nexus on her sensors now. A massive distortion in space where reality bent around the Vexkari Central Intelligence. They were close. So close. Shadow 1, this is the carrier. We're in position, preparing to deploy the resonance device. Ji-won's voice came through tense but steady. The engineer had spent 2 years building this weapon. She knew every circuit, every power conduit, every calculation that went into its design. Now she would see if it actually worked or if they had all died for nothing. The device was released from the carrier and began its approach to the Nexus, carried forward by momentum and hope. Ji-won activated the power systems and watched readings climb into ranges that made her heart race. Everything was holding. The device was working exactly as designed. Then the Vexkari adapted. A pulse of energy erupted from the Nexus. Pure destructive force meant to obliterate the device before it could activate. Ji-won watched in horror as her screens filled with warnings. The pulse would hit in 12 seconds. The device needed 15 seconds to fully charge. They were going to fail. Come so close and fail anyway. Shadow Squadron, can you give us 3 seconds? Ji-won transmitted desperately. Yuna didn't answer with words. She simply acted. Her fighter and the 5 remaining ships positioned themselves between the device and the incoming pulse. 6 small vessels against a wave of energy that could erase planets. It was absurd. It was impossible. It was human. The pulse hit them like the fist of an angry god. Yuna's fighter disintegrated around her. She had maybe a second to feel pain and fear before everything went white. But in that second, she thought about the little girl she had been, watching the news broadcasts of humanity standing up to the galaxy. She had wanted to be a pilot who mattered. She had wanted to make a difference. As consciousness faded, she knew she had succeeded. The 6 ships absorbed just enough of the pulse to weaken it. The resonance device survived. Ji-won watched through tears as the countdown reached 0 and the device activated. Reality screamed. That was the only way to describe it. The device did exactly what Yoonji had designed it to do. It punched through the dimensional barrier with all the crude force of human FTL technology, scaled up 1,000 times. The pocket dimension where the Vexkari intelligence existed collapsed in on itself. The effect was immediate. Across the entire galaxy, every Vexkari drone simply stopped. Mid-battle, mid-movement, they froze. Then they began to drift, dead metal hulks without the intelligence that had animated them. The swarm was gone. The intelligence that controlled it had been destroyed, taking 3 star systems with it as the dimensional collapse rippled through real space. On the Unity, Admiral Tae-yang stared at the tactical displays and couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. The threat indicators were vanishing. The drones were going dark. They had won. The cost had been horrible, but they had won. Ceasefire, he ordered quietly. Signal all ships. The war is over. The silence that followed was profound. After 18 months of constant combat, the sudden absence of battle was almost painful. Ships that had been fighting to the death moments ago now drifted in the wreckage, their crews too stunned to react. On Earth, billions of people received the news and didn't know how to feel. They had won, but entire fleets were gone. Tens of thousands of humans had died. The victory was real, but so was the grief. Dr. Yoonji sat in her laboratory and cried for the pilots who had died delivering her weapon. Ji-won survived, though the carrier ship barely made it back to friendly space. She would spend months recovering from injuries sustained in the battle. But she was alive, and the device had worked. The Galactic Assembly held an emergency session 1 week after the war ended. The Grand Hall was quieter than anyone could remember. So many empty seats where representatives had been before, so many species that had lost entire fleets in the final battle. Ambassador Dae-jung stood to address the assembly. He was older now, gray in his hair and lines on his face. He looked exhausted but unbroken. When he spoke, his voice carried through the chamber with quiet strength. "We came to this hall 7 years ago," he began. "We came with hope and idealism. We were mocked, dismissed as primitives, assigned to the lowest tier of membership and treated like servants. Many of you thought we would fail. Some of you hoped we would. We proved you wrong, not because we wanted revenge, not because we needed to feel superior. We proved you wrong because we had no other choice. Humanity has always adapted or died. We chose to adapt." He paused and looked around the chamber. Velthera sat in the Sarith section listening intently. Cormix was present via hologram, the ancient insectoid too injured to attend in person. Archon Kelva sat at the head of the assembly, looking like he had aged decades in 2 years. "The war is over," Dae-jung continued. "The Vexkari are gone, but we cannot go back to the way things were before. Too much has changed. Too many have died. We fought together, bled together, died together. Humans, Sarith, Hive Collective, and dozens of other species. We proved that when we work together, respecting each other's strengths and covering each other's weaknesses, we can achieve the impossible." The assembly voted unanimously to restructure. Humanity was granted full membership status with complete voting rights and representation. But more importantly, the entire system of tiers and hierarchies was abolished. Species would no longer be judged by their age or traditions, but by their contributions and character. Ji-won recovered and led the reconstruction efforts. Her hybrid engineering philosophy, combining human adaptability with alien knowledge, became the standard across the galaxy. She taught thousands of students from hundreds of worlds, spreading the idea that innovation came from cooperation and diversity. Dr. Yoonji headed the new Interspecies Science Coalition, a research organization that included the best minds from across the galaxy, working together on projects that benefited everyone. She never forgot the pilots who died delivering her weapon. Every year on the anniversary, she visited the memorial wall where their names were carved alongside millions of others. Admiral Tae-yang oversaw the formation of the Unified Defense Force, a truly integrated military that included ships and personnel from every species willing to contribute. The force operated on principles that combined human tactical flexibility with alien strategic discipline. It was more effective than any military the galaxy had seen before. Captain Hyunwoo survived his ordeal, rescued from the wreckage of the Soul Defender by a Hive Collective medical ship. He retired from active duty and accepted a teaching position at the new Interspecies Military Academy. There he trained the next generation of officers in the lessons learned through blood and sacrifice. His students were human, alien, and everything in between. Yuna's name was carved on the memorial wall among the honored dead. She was 16 when she died, one of 6 pilots who gave their lives in the final seconds of the war. Her family visited the memorial often. Her little brother, inspired by her sacrifice, joined the academy when he was old enough. He wanted to be a pilot, too. He wanted to honor her memory by helping protect the peace she died to achieve. 10 years after the war, the galaxy looked very different. Trade flowed freely between species that had barely spoken before. Mixed species colonies sprang up on worlds that welcomed diversity. Technology advanced faster than ever, as different perspectives combined to solve problems no single species could handle alone. Art, music, and culture mixed and evolved in beautiful and unexpected ways. The universe had laughed at humanity once, mocked them as primitive newcomers who didn't belong among the established civilizations, but humanity had responded not with anger or resentment but with determination and courage. They had proven that youth was not weakness, that being different was not being inferior, that sometimes the best solution was to ignore the rules everyone else followed. The echo of human engines awakening still resonated through the galaxy. It was a reminder that change was possible, that growth came from challenge, that the future belonged not to those who clung to the past, but to those who dared to adapt and innovate. Earth stood among the stars now, not as a servant or a curiosity but as an equal, and the galaxy was better for it, because humanity had taught everyone a lesson they desperately needed to learn, that no matter how old or wise you think you are, there is always something new to discover, always room to grow, always a reason to keep fighting for something better. The war was over, but the real work of building a better galaxy had only just begun, and this time humans and aliens would build it together.